COP27 and perhaps the most fundamental and philosophical weakness in the COP27 and climate crisis programme. The climate crisis logic is based on the premise that the Earth's climate is changing. From that premise springs the logical question: from what state is the climate changing? COP26 provided the answer to that question. It was stated and believed that the Earth's climate is changing from a good and normal climate to a warmer, abnormal and alarming climate, and needs to be restored to its previous state. This belief lies at the heart of all those that campaign for what they believe is a climate crisis. An extreme example of this core belief was made by Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She said, "The climate has been stable over the course of human history, and now all of a sudden that's not the case anymore." The climate has been stable over the course of human history. That is about 200,000 years. This video will demonstrate that in fact the Earth's climate has never been good and normal. It has always changed. We will cover the last 500 million years of the Earth's climate and ask, when exactly was this good and normal previous state that COP26, Catherine Hayhoe, and now COP27 believes existed? This chart shows global mean annual temperatures from 500 million years ago to roughly the present in degrees Celsius. At around 500 million years ago, global temperature stood at approximately 28 degrees Celsius. Ever since, it has gone through natural cycles of rise in temperature and fall in temperature, but overall gradually dropping until the intensely cold period of the Karoo Ice Age. Following the 100 million year Karoo Ice Age, global temperature increased quite sharply, but would fall again under the chaotic influence of the coupled non-linear climate system. Eventually, the global temperature would drop to its roughly present level, which is around 13.7 degrees Celsius, 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Historically, therefore, our current global temperature is very low. It is the lowest it has been for about 260 million years. In fact, the Earth's current climate is the latest stage in a slow cooling process that has been in progress for the last approximately 50 million years. During this cooling, ice sheets formed on the Antarctic continent about 40 million years ago, while the first signs of northern hemisphere glaciation appeared much more recently. And over the course of that 50 million years, many physical, chemical and biological interaction processes of the climate system converged to form the Quaternary Ice Age 2.58 million years ago. Our planet Earth is still in that ice age. At the start of the Quaternary period, there appeared alternations between cold glacial periods with ice on the northern hemisphere continents and warmer intervals with little or no northern hemisphere continental ice. Around 800,000 years ago, weaker cycles with a period of around 40,000 years gave way to stronger, greater isotopic amplitude cycles with a recurrence period closer to 100,000 years, as can be seen from this chart. The period of around 100,000 years aligns with one of nature's chaotic influences, the Milankovitch cycles of eccentricity. The cycles alternated between cold glacial periods with ice on the northern hemisphere continents, and warmer interglacial periods with little or no northern hemisphere continental ice. The Earth is in an interglacial period now. This means that the northern hemisphere continental ice sheets and glaciers will wax and wane, sometimes shrinking, sometimes expanding. After making that point, now is a good time to reflect on Dr. Catherine Hayhoe's claim that the climate has been stable over the course of human history. The ancestors of modern human beings walked the earth throughout this 800,000 years of climate change. And at around 200,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved. They, or we, it could be said, join this history of climate change at this point. Peak temperatures in the most recent warm interglacials were 2 degrees to 4.5 degrees Celsius higher than the last millennium. It must also be noted that as well as these long-term peaks and troughs of global temperature, there were much shorter-term variations within each cycle. If we look at the previous interglacial peak at around 128,000 years ago, we see at that time East Antarctic ice cores record early peak temperatures approximately 5 degrees Celsius above the present, and high latitude surface temperature, averaged over several thousand years, was at least 2 degrees Celsius warmer than present. But during those peaks lasting thousands of years, there were persistent short-term fluctuations in global temperature, as demonstrated by this chart of 127 to 130,000 years ago. After the peak temperature of this period, the global temperature plunged. It reached the lowest temperature of the past 800,000 years, with the last glacial maximum around 27,000 to 19,000 years ago. Ice sheets formed around the world, making the lands they covered uninhabitable, not only on the extremes of the Antarctic and Greenland, but also on the Laurentine ice sheet of North America, the Patagonian ice sheet of South America, and the Eurasian ice sheet. On several occasions, the climate varied from that of the average of the last 1,000 years by minus 10 degrees Celsius. Eventually, the global temperature warmed once again, and the ice sheets retreated. But even this warming process came to an abrupt halt as global temperature dropped sharply for a period of around 1,000 years, the period known as the Younger Dryas. Warming began once more, and this warming phase that took place about 11,500 years ago at the end of the Younger Dryas was very abrupt, and central Greenland temperature increased by 7 degrees Celsius or more in a few decades. After which our present interglacial period, the Holocene, began around 11,500 years ago. Moving on, this chart shows Holocene global mean surface temperature anomalies from around 10,000 BCE to 1850 CE. We pick up the story at around 8,000 BCE, at which point the African humid period had started. Heavy rain led to the Sahara being reoccupied by human beings, animals and plants as it grew ever greener. As the reoccupation increased, the Neolithic Revolution took place, where previously small nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers took advantage of the fertile lands and transitioned to larger agricultural settlements and early civilization. According to this study by Kaufman et al., published in 2020, At around 6,500 years ago, 4,500 BCE, GMST was approximately 0.7 degrees Celsius warmer than the 19th century. It seems likely that this continuous change to the climate would have been appreciated by the humans of that time, and the warmth of thousands of years culminating in a 200-year-long interval could be said to represent a kind of stable climate. But a point to emphasize, because a chart such as this covers thousands of years, it smooths out and thus hides the sharp waxing and waning of global temperature over shorter periods. Reducing the focus to the still long period of 1,000 years, fluctuations in global temperature are clearly visible. But after that time of the global thermal maximum, the climate changed again, and GMST cooled at an average rate of minus 0.08 degrees Celsius per 1,000 years. The decrease in global average temperature terminated the African humid period, and the Sahara became ever more arid as the temperatures dropped. Global mean surface temperature continued to drop until we reached the year 1850, which is the start point from which the IPCC uses to measure global temperature anomalies. It is also the end point of the Little Ice Age, which the IPCC defines as occurring during the period 1450 to 1850. It must be noted that this period, which led up to the IPCC reference period, was extremely cold, harsh, and not at all stable. It was not unusual for rivers and even near-shore seas to freeze. Between 1607 and 1814, there were numerous fairs held on London's frozen River Thames. During the Great Winter of 1683 to 1684, even the seas south of Britain were frozen solid for up to 2 miles from shore. Towards the end of the Little Ice Age, the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain at around 1750. Comparing the Little Ice Age to the rest of the Holocene. If we look at the entire Holocene and plot back from the Little Ice Age, we see that according to the 5th percentile, the Little Ice Age was cooler than the previous 10,000 years. For the median, it was cooler than the previous greater than 10,000 years. The same for the 95th percentile. All in all, it seems extremely unlikely that modern humans, after their 200,000 years of existence, would have classified the Little Ice Age as good, normal, and stable. Immediately following the Little Ice Age begins the period where modern instrumental records of global temperature have been maintained. We now examine that period from 1850 right up to September 2022. Modern humans could have been forgiven for expecting global temperatures to immediately rise after the Little Ice Age, and of course after the Industrial Revolution of 1750. They would have been disappointed, as global average temperature got cooler, especially 1900 to 1909, which was cooler than over 95% of the Holocene. In addition, it was not at all stable, with global average temperature swinging up and down. With a quite remarkable increase in global average temperature from 1876 to 1878 of 0.41 degrees Celsius in just 2 years. Global average temperature increased for the next 10 years, up to 1939, too short a time to be considered the elusive good and normal climate. For the next 40 years, global average temperature decreased at a rate of only minus 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade. Could this be the elusive good and normal and stable climate? It was not stable. From 1944 to 1956, global average temperatures dropped from plus 0.28 degrees Celsius to minus 0.18 degrees Celsius. That is a drop of 0.46 degrees Celsius in just 12 years. But was it a good climate with no storms, for example? Just as one example, the very next year in 1957, Hurricane Audrey was the most intense hurricane to have ever formed in the Atlantic Basin during the month of June, and was also the earliest hurricane to have reached Category 4 strength. So we rule out 1940 to 1979 as the sought-after period of stability and goodness. 1980 to 2014 cannot be considered the golden period, as it was the increase in temperature with a linear trend of 0.15 degrees Celsius per decade that led to the Paris Agreement, Net Zero and United Nations Agenda 2030. Despite the downward trend in global average temperature, in the almost 8-year period from 2015 to September 2022, this also cannot be considered as, according to the United Nations, ever-rising greenhouse gas emissions are supercharging extreme weather events across the planet. Leaving aside its emotional, unscientific phrasing, yet again this statement rests on the premise that there has existed a good and normal climate, which was stable, a climate that did not have extreme weather events as we face today. This video has demonstrated that such a climate has never existed, but perhaps we missed something. If so, we ask COP27, including the IPCC, the World Economic Forum, and the United Nations, please define exactly when you believe such a good and normal and stable climate existed. Without such a definition, COP27 and its agenda have zero credibility. Our community combines the topics of globalism, nationalism, climate change, health, and the New World Order. If you would like to join our community, you can find us on locals.com/discover. Just enter the New World Order. This link will take you directly to our site.